Nigeria's food inflation rate rose 7.08% to 39.93% year-on-year on the back of higher energy and transportation costs as well as increases in the prices of staple foods. Kola Masha, Chief Executive Officer of Babban Gona, joins me now for more on Nigeria's journey to food security and the outlook for the grains market. Mr. Masha, thanks a lot for joining us on the show today. What's your assessment of the food inflation trajectory we've seen so far this year, the sort of print we have for the month of November, and the impact of government strategy to stem the rising tide?
Well, I think, the unfortunate reality is that we have seen food inflation remain at these quite high levels for a while. I think fundamentally, unless we're able to attack the root cause of this high food inflation, which at the end of the day is driven by constraints on the supply side, I think we are. It's going to be a challenging next few months.
And talking about how the outlook looks like right now, do you foresee any sort of moderation? Because we're looking at headline inflation and the forecast that there will see moderation there. However, looking at the blend of fiscal and monetary policy, that might deter or slow down the sort of pace we might see here. But that on one hand, let's talk about the impact of some of the latest moves we've seen. For example, the African Development Bank has facilitated a $2.2 billion facility for special agro-industrial processing zones here in Nigeria. That's the phase 2 of the project. And we also have Nigeria and France also signed the €300 million agreement on food security. Let's talk about the scope, scale, and the likely impact do you think these might have in the short term?
Well, I think investment in the sector in any form is direly needed. However, I think at the end of the day, the investment that you're outlining is going to actually have more of an impact on the demand side for agricultural produce, because it's focused on investing in agro-processing. So in terms of addressing the root cause, which is really a supply side constraint of low productivity at the farmer level, primarily driven by a lack of financing to farmers to be able to purchase the quantity and quality of agricultural inputs they need to get high productivity. That investment, be it as may, is an important investment, is likely not going to have as big of an impact on the food inflation side.
But now let's talk about the investments that we're seeing here right now. We also have the Agri Minister talking about investment volumes, looking at genetically modified foods and how this is also critical to Nigeria's journey to food sufficiency. Do you buy into this idea around investments in GMOs?
Well, I think fundamentally, investment in technology, if it's done responsibly and has good regulatory frameworks around it to ensure, that we are managing any risks associated with that new technology, I think it's important that we adopt technology. This is actually, quite frankly, it's new in Nigeria, but it's quite old technology. It's been used for over 2 decades in most parts of the world with relatively limited challenges. However, once again, I think it's great that these seeds will have the potential to increase productivity. However, the reality is that there's existing technology today that can get farmers 4 tons, 5 tons, 6 tons per hectare. However, yields are still at around 2 tons per hectare because to those when you have great seed, you need to complement that great seed with the right complement of soil health management products, weed management products, et cetera, which costs money, right? It costs the typical farmer about $500 per hectare for full complement of technology to unlock the full productivity of these new seed varieties. So one without the other, you're likely not going to see a big boost in supply. But if you're able to complement them, then yes, you will see a big boost in supply and a knock-on effect on food inflation.
And talking about the future as well, now how we see things panning forward, we have the latest figures from the FAO as well, talking about worsening food insecurity here in the country on the back of devastating floods and the impact so far. I'd like your take on that as well now, when we're also juxtaposing that to the overall strategy, the threats towards all year round farming. And when we are looking at grains, for example, paddy rice and maize, wheat, in terms of how the country is also positioning, what's your outlook for the market as a whole?
Well, I think to the point around all year farming, it's a huge opportunity. I think Nigeria today, roughly only about 3% of our land is irrigated, and of that 3%, the reality is a good chunk of that irrigation may not be fully functioning. So it's a huge opportunity. If you look at countries like Thailand as an example, if you look at their path towards becoming one of the world's largest exporter of agricultural produce today, over $35 billion. Investment in irrigation was a critical piece. However, that came really as phase 3 in their investment strategy. First, they got farmers financing. Then they got farmers very productive in the in the rainy season, and then they started to invest in irrigation, and finally in mechanization and other things to improve labor productivity. So it's really a 4-step process. We're still in Nigeria in step 1.
And talking about the processes ahead to also have bigger impact here in the agri sector, let's talk about the sort of growth we saw in the third quarter of this year and juxtaposing that to the first half of this year. We've seen the agricultural sector growing just about a modest growth of 1.14% in the third quarter of this year. Looking into 2025 now, you've talked about the issues around FX volatility, the high cost of inputs here, fertilizer. These are still lingering challenges, insecurity. Now, in terms of the sort of print you expect for 2025, how do you see the agri sector positioning and having a larger volume of growth and contribution to the overall GDP?
Well, I think, the reality is, today, we're seeing interest rates somewhere between 30 and 40%. You already had a sector that was starved of financing, and financing has been constrained, and what limited financing that's available is quite expensive. So what you've seen is most farmers, as a coping mechanism, are actually switching to crops that are less expensive to grow, right? That have lower input requirements and so on and so forth, which is actually contributing to this high inflation. The reality is that the main staples, rice, maize, so on and so forth, those crops require significant investments in fertilizers and other agrochemicals, and farmers just don't have the capital to do that. So unless we're able to come up with solutions to get financing quickly and at scale in a sustainable manner, it is going to be a challenging 2025.
And lastly, now we're still looking at price movements as well. Now, for you, as we are wrapping up the year 2024 and looking into 2025, we have talked about wheat, paddy rice, and maize. For you, what sort of movements do you see here, and how can Nigeria also cash in on all of this, especially on the back of the African Continental Free Trade Area, increasing the sort of trade volumes you see along the west of the continent as well? Now, do you think Nigeria's position right to cash in on all of the movements we have here?
Well, I think, if you look at, the reality, some of the, today we do have a significant food inflation challenge, which can, if not checked, lead to a significant food security challenge. So if you look at some of the steps that have been taken to try to constrain demand, so you can attack inflation by either increasing supply or reducing demand. And I think some of the efforts have been around on the demand side by limiting exports and so on and so forth. I think, important in the short run to manage the risk of food insecurity. However, as a long-term strategy, really constraining demand can be actually counterproductive because it's really that demand that you get by exporting into other parts. Nigeria has a huge opportunity. We have 60 million people market just to the north of us. That's landlocked that we can really dramatically serve. And so that's an opportunity we need to harness. But we can do that once we get the supply up through dramatic increases in productivity.
Well, Mr. Masha, we'll leave the conversation here for now. Thank you so much for your time on the show today. That was Kola Masha, the Chief Executive Officer of Babban Gona.